jobs within the next 2 weeks and are being replaced by a consultant company. The employees who are losing their jobs are being forced to participate in knowledge transfer meetings each day with the replacements of this consultant company, most of which are offshore in India. This is a growing trend among companies with large IT staffs, as developers, architects, database admins, and analysts are expensive components on the payroll. With Donald Trump's focus on keeping American jobs in America, why is there little or no coverage of the intellectual exodus of technical positions offshore? That's from Dan.
Hey, Dan, how you doing?
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Oh, thank you. What's it like in the company? The reference to training your replacements, it's called digging your own grave. You know, like you get pulled out into the desert outside of Las Vegas, and then you have to dig your own grave, and then they shoot you and throw you in it. So this kind of knowledge transfer, it's sort of referred to as that. What's it like in the company? Are people shell-shocked? I mean, how are they reacting?
Yeah, so every few years we go through this. I've been there for about 3 years, and I know previously to me being there, they've gone through these restructuring segments in time where they react to the market, they react to government regulation, and there's layoffs, and it's kind of volatile every, I'd say, 3 to 4 years. This one's a little different. This one wasn't really anticipated. It seemed like it came out of nowhere. For me, as I wasn't part of the web development staff, although I work with them very closely, there's a lot of unknown. I've had some good news since I originally wrote to you in that 2 of my developers have been brought on board with this consulting company. However, there's a lot still who are being shadowed by these outsourced consultants. And like I said, we're from India. So there's a lot of unknowns. It's disappointing, I would say, with me and my other colleagues who are safe for the time. We're just very disappointed in the approach. We understand the approach. We understand the dollars and cents behind it. But it's disappointing. It's nerve-wracking for us because we don't know if we are next. We assume we may be, but there's just a lot of uncertainty, and we're approaching the 14th, which is their last day. So I'm assuming that we'll learn more after that, but there hasn't been a lot of communication to this point.
Right. And is there? I mean, are people obviously firing their resumes out and all that? I mean, it's got to be pretty rough.
Yeah, that's it. And in my department, I'm a little bit removed, but related. I've been assured that my position's safe. Again, we're uncertain as far how long, but yeah, there's a big movement to head off any potential layoff situation where it's always better to go on your own terms than leaving or looking for a job when you don't have anything in front of you.
Right.
So yeah, there is. It's just a general feeling of uncertainty, and for me, being unimpacted personally, like through my own job, but seeing other people go through it, who do you turn to make citizens aware of this? Because it's not a big. You don't see it. You don't see a factory moving. You don't see a factory being shut down, but it's all this intellectual resource being moved out, and it's very, very. It's hidden. It's not obvious, and you don't hear about it. At least I haven't heard about it. I've heard about it through some people in town for other big employers, as this is a trend, but I don't get the feel that it's as known nationally
Sure.
as
Well,
it's
listen,
happening.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but one of the reasons that it's not known that much is that reporters as a whole tend to be complete morons. No, they don't. They don't understand technology. They don't understand coding. They don't understand databases. They don't understand maintenance or anything like that. They don't know. They're saving money. Woo-hoo, or the people who really do understand technology, well, they probably need access to a bunch of the people who are making these decisions. And so it's not well understood. Now, do you have any idea how many lines of code are being maintained or what the code library is like, how big it is?
It's enormous.
It's huge,
Not
right?
only the code library, but patient medical history. Things that are supposed to be very secure are, I want to say potentially, but I know for a fact, are going to be accessed by people overseas who aren't adhering to the same type of security protocols as we have to here.
Right, and frankly would be much more bribable as a whole.
Yes,
But
exactly.
people don't understand, and I mean, I know this. I know this because I worked with a lot of big systems. I mean, I first started coding when I was 12, and I coded for a living. I was a head of R&D. I was, a code that I wrote was sold for millions and millions of dollars to big companies, and we had to fit into their existing systems. Now, it may have changed. I'm not sure how much, but it may have changed. A lot of big companies, their IT systems are a house of cards. You have various operating systems, you have various database standards, you've got intermediary file depositories, you've got like all kinds of crazy stuff flying all over the place. It's really complicated stuff, and you have millions of lines of code. And every line of code it's like a butterfly effect. I mean, I remember when I was responsible for moving code from COBOL 74 to COBOL 80, you didn't want to slip a period. You didn't want to, you change one tiny thing, and it can have a ripple effect that could potentially cost millions and millions of dollars. I mean, this is a high volume trading stuff. And so the idea to me, when I hear, oh yeah, we're going to transfer all of this knowledge in 2 weeks across potential language and cultural barriers, like there's no way. Well, here's what it sounds like to me. It's like, well, okay, it's true that I have been a brain surgeon for 20 years. Well trained, steady as a rock under pressure, and I know what I'm doing inside a human skull. Now, you're from India. I'm sure you've had some training over there. I'm going to teach you everything I know in 2 weeks. Come on. But because for managers who don't understand tech, and there is this traditional barrier, the tech people aren't people, and the people aren't tech people. Which is why you have the salespeople out there saying, sure, the technology can do that. You guys can make that change, can't you? I mean, they don't understand technology, and the tech people aren't necessarily people, so they don't end up in those kind of management positions. And that's a very real problem. Because what happens is a bunch of consultants sponge into management, and they say, well, we've done a review of your payroll, and your payroll is this, and we can get you something for this in India, right? And it seems credible. It seems credible. Now, one of the reasons it seems credible is because if the coders aren't that good, it won't show up for a while. So you're going to cut your payroll significantly, and the problems may not show up for a couple of years. The problems may not show up until there's a security breach because someone didn't follow particular security protocols. The problems may not show up until there's some kind of upgrade, or the problems may not show up until one system goes down, it has a ripple effect, and right, the problems are down the road. The profit is now. Now, there used to be something in business which was a dedication to long-term profiting, and managers who wanted the quick and easy buck were generally looked on as idiots, as junky. Why would we want 20 extra bucks now when we could get $10 extra a year for the next 20 years, right? And the reason that's happened, this is one of the first shows I did in the True News called The Supercharged Stock Market. The reason that's happened is so much money has been jammed and forced and squished and crushed into the stock market. Money that damn well doesn't want to be there. It does not want to be there. It's there because it's being chased by the predators at the IRS or the other tax departments. Oh, if I don't put my money into some index fund, if I don't put my money into some financial instrument to hide it from the tax man, not hide it, like not hide it, but you know what I mean, escape it, escape taxes. You put your money into your tax savings plan, you put your money into your retirement plan, and it's taxed at a lower rate if it's taxed at all. And in Canada here, there were some funds that if you invested in them, they were tax-free, and they turned into, you know, the usual clusterfuck of corruption and low returns that you could conceivably imagine. So money is fleeing the tax man, and its safe haven is the stock market. But that puts so much money into the stock market that it's sloshing around looking for tiny variations in profit. The stock market needs to be starved. It needs to be like 1/10, if that, what it is now. If people weren't fleeing the tax man, they wouldn't put their money into the stock market. I mean, who the hell wants to put their money in the stock market? I mean, there are a few people who love trading, and more power to them, good for them. But most people just want to put their money in a bank account or buy a couple of bonds or just, you know, and it's also being driven into the stock market because of inflation, right? So it's fleeing the tax man, and it's being pursued by the giant predator called inflation, which means that just sticking your money in a bank, which should be a reasonable hedge against reasonable inflation, there shouldn't be any inflation at all, basically, that doesn't work. You put your money in a bank, and you're losing money. So people jam their money into the stock market. The stock market, the people who are doing the money management are then looking for anything. It's by quarter. It's like, oh, you know, we missed our earnings this quarter. Your stocks just crater, and then management gets replaced, and the stockholders are incensed, and there's lawsuits and threats, and it's horrible. It's a horrible environment. And I mean, the halcyon days at the beginning of my entrepreneurial life, when I was just creating beautiful things in code, creating things that reduced environmental impact, that kept the air and the groundwater and the water all cleaner. That was a beautiful time. And because we were successful, because my code was successful and my management was successful and other people were successful, because we were successful, Dan, the money men came. The money men came along, and they were going to make us rich, and they were going to get us on a stock exchange, and they were going to just make all these wonderful things happen. It's like the devil taking Jesus up to the mountaintop and saying, this land can be yours. Just focus on the money rather than the beauty. And it is a horrifying thing that occurs. And it became spreadsheets, and it became numbers, and it became watching the stock ticker, and it became all about that. And I kept dragging everyone saying, we were here creating beautiful things that made the world a better place, that made the world a cleaner place, that reduced pollution. And now we're staring at stocks and counting magic money in our head. Let's go back to creating the beautiful stuff. And when the money men come in, your company can go kind of mental. And you turn, basically, my experience was you turn from a loving wife into a shallow whore. And it is a gross process. So I think what happens is they say, well, you know, we can cut 50, 60, 70, 80% of our payroll and get exactly the same outcome. The reality, of course, is that, well, you can't. You can't. You're going to get bad code. The amount of knowledge, like, I remember this when I worked at a coding place. Sitting down with guys, and, you know, I need to make this change. They're like, whoa, right? Whoa, hang on. Whoa there, young bucko. You want to make the change to this particular module? Woo, okay, let me draw that out for you, right? And they'd sit there on the whiteboard, and it would then look like a map of the London subway or something, right? Or like the flowchart that justifies the logic of socialism. Here be miracles. So they would put this stuff on the whiteboard, like these boxes and these lines and these diagrams. This affects this, affects this, affects this. So you got to be careful about this. And blah, blah, blah. I mean, they knew their stuff because they'd been coding there for years. Years. And the idea that you can just transfer all of that in 2 weeks, oh, come on. Employee base of over 40,000 people. That's mad. I mean, I bet you they got a bunch of custom software development there. They got a bunch of modules linking together. They got a bunch of databases trying to link together. I mean, it is like the amount of human knowledge that's stuffed into the minds of those coders and maintainers and testers and so on is absolutely enormous. And I know this because, I mean, I built code that had quite a lot. I built a system that had quite a lot of code and integrated with other systems and all that. The idea that I'm going to transfer my knowledge of that in a couple of weeks, I mean, it's just ridiculous. But because the business people don't understand tech, and the tech people are intimidated by the business people. You know, the tech people, the best tech people are the ones who just love it. I mean, I was coding for years and years before I ever made a dime, and I just loved it. Same way I did philosophy for years and years. I used to debate like this in private. Nobody ever gave me a dime. Well, occasionally dinner. But the best coders, they're just thrilled to be there. You know, it's like if you're an actor, or, you know, musicians are constantly doing this all the time. Musicians, like, I'm just happy to be able to sing and dance for a living. And then everyone just rips off everything that they make, and they end up with like nothing. I was just reading this about some musician the other day who like wrote a string of hits and ended up with like $11,000 in the bank account because, you know, it's like Sting's accountant and Billy Joel's man, like they just hoover it up. I'm just thrilled to be here when they don't negotiate. And it's the same thing with coders. They're kind of intimidated. Like the traditional coders are the nerds and the business people are the jocks. And, you know, it's freaks and geeks all over the place. And there's resentment and there's fear and and they don't know how to push back. They don't know how to prove their value. They don't know how to stand up and say to the business people, you're making a terrible mistake. And in a way, it's kind of hard for them to do that. Because what's going to happen is they're going to say to people who don't know any better, i.e., a lot of money managers, they're going to say, hey, you know, we just cut our overhead and our expenses by X millions of dollars a year. Now, project that forward out. It's over 10 years, we've saved, we're only spending this, we're outsourcing, it's 2 weeks, we got a little bit of, you know, one-time hit of people leaving and the money we got to pay for them. And everyone out in the stock market says, whoa, that's great. These guys they're getting exactly the same product, but they're saving so much. Because they don't know, they don't understand. And then what happens is the people who are making those decisions get their bonuses, get their stock options, get their wealth, and that's often enough to keep them comfy for the rest of their lives. What do they care about what the company's doing in 5 or 10 years? They've moved on. See, they've moved on, and they look like heroes. Wow, look at our stock price, look at our overhead, it's way down. Payrolls cut enormously. Profits are up. Stock prices through the roof. I'm a business genius. You know, I do run a fleet of taxi cabs, but I've decided to stop changing the oil and maintaining them. Woohoo, look at that. Maintenance costs are way down. What do you care in 6 months, right? And so they look like business geniuses. They make a fortune for themselves and for the company and for the shareholders. And then what happens is 5 years later, maybe 3 to 5 years later, problems start emerging, but they may be gone. Or there aren't enough people who understand the thread of the decisions that are made now versus the domino effects that are happening 3 to 5 years down the road, or maybe less, could be slightly more. And then there's like, wow, you know, we have lots of problems with IT, lots of problems with IT. And, you know, funnily enough, when we took our IT from a country with an average IQ of 100 and we moved it to a country with an average IQ of 80 to 85, well, anyway, I know the coders are smarter and all that, but then what happens is the managers, like, don't go and work for this company in a couple of years, in my opinion, because then you're going to start inheriting all these problems. And then you're going to say, well, you know, this is, you know, we've got some IT issues. Nobody goes back and gets money back from the previous guys, right? Their money's theirs, right? We got IT issues, man, we're going to have to spend a lot. We got to rewrite a whole bunch of stuff. We got to take on some extraordinary expenses. We might have to move it back in-house, you know, and then that's their challenge. And then people are going to lose money and stockholders are going to lose money. But, you know, the previous stockholders are very happy. Stock price went up because of these illusory gains. You need to starve the stock market of revenue so that people are more critical of the long-term effects of short-term decisions. If everybody's just watching the needle, ooh, it went up, sell, make money, right? It's like that old The Fisher King. There's some homeless guy in the movie called The Fisher King. There's a homeless guy yelling into a phone that's not connected to anything. You know, sell, sell, sell. And then I think, Robin Williams comes along or someone comes along, gives him $20, and he's like, stares at the $20, and then yells into the disconnected phone, buy. I mean, that's what it's all come down to. I'm sorry for the long rant, but I mean, I've had some time to focus on this, and I think it is tragic, very, very tragic.
Well, I know this was going to hit close to home for you, as you are a tech guy, and you're right. I mean, where these decisions are made, it's made far above where I'm at and my colleagues who are being let go, and they are just pushing numbers. I mean, my colleagues were shifted to another team, who were then in a couple months were kind of rounded up into these web developers, and then all let go in a big sum. And I know it's just because they're pushing money around. It looks better to hire a consultant than having these full-time employees with benefits. And we've seen other local large healthcare companies do similar things in the last couple years. So it's a growing trend. And I'm curious as to why we're not hearing about it. Like I hear about it because I'm involved with it. I'm right there. But as far as nationally, we don't hear about this. It's just a great big push out overseas, and it's been happening for years. I know I've heard about it in the past, but now it directly impacts me, and we don't hear about it. And it's a huge piece of American ingenuity that is just easily being just pushed off. I mean, I worked in a startup company about 10 years ago, and the one developer that we had, it was very small. We had under 10 employees, and he was straight out of college, and he was brilliant, but he needed more help. So they interviewed, and they're offering, $80,000, $90,000, which isn't really a lot for a developer. They didn't find anyone who would fit, but they turned to another company who outsourced to India again, and we got 5 developers for that $80,000, opposed to getting one developer here for that $80,000. And I know that the quality of that person isn't the same. I mean, and I know from firsthand accounts of what it takes to ramp someone up, to get them to a level where they're familiar with the databases, the coding, everything that's involved, and the education level. Like there's a definite step down when you go overseas. So to your point, my company is going to feel this, and I believe in the short term. My customers are people inside of my own company who I need to gather requirements for and provide for. They're going to feel this immediately in the turnaround time that's going to take to get changes and applications created for their use. So it's going to hinder us as a whole, and I'm just concerned as not only my own company, but it's obviously happening other places, but we just don't hear about it. It's just
right.
this vacuum.
Well, it's
that we
also
don't hear about.
nerds, right? I mean, people have this indifference, right? And Michelle Malkin's book is great on this, because we haven't even talked about the H-1B visas, but I had a call with her coworker,
yes.
And the book is called Sold Out: How High-Tech Billionaires and Bipartisan Beltway Crap Weasels Are Screwing America's Best and Brightest Workers. And so it is one of these great tragedies. And here's another thing, too, which I just sort of a point I wanted to make. And I'm sorry that I couldn't get hard data for this, Dan, but I think we can guesstimate some of this. I did have a look, but I couldn't find it. So America spends an enormous amount per student per year on education, right? 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, sometimes even more, to educate kids in primary, junior high, high school, right?
Right.
Massive amounts of money. Now, I saw various estimates with India. Let's just put it this way. It's a lot lower.
Yes.
It's a lot lower.
Yes.
So this is my question. If after investing $120,000 to $240,000 plus in a student, how the hell can that student not compete with somebody who was educated at about the rate of 4.5 rupees a year, conservatively speaking, right? I mean, what the hell? I mean, we know. I mean, I know the answer, but it's an important answer. It's an important question for people to ponder. How can you just spend 2 weeks transferring work from people who've had that much education poured into them to people who've had far less spending on education? Doesn't that mean that we should just spend way less on education because it doesn't seem to make a difference? You can just 2 weeks, you just hand all this work over. Why the hell is America spending so much money educating people when you could educate them at Indian standards and just transfer it? Anyway.
That's right. And Stefan, to your point, we're looking at some people who've been there 15, 20 years who have this enormous experience, and just the relationships that you build over that time with other parts of the business, you can't quantify. There's no way of duplicating that. Yeah, within 2 weeks, within 2 months, within 2 years. There's no way to do that, and it's just it is a tragedy. It breaks my heart. Like I said, the people closest to me have actually been absorbed into this consultant company, which is a good thing for them. But the remainder, we're losing a lot of other good people, but we're gaining a lot of just unfamiliar people. And you're right, the education's probably not there. The experience is definitely not there. It's just concerning to me. Not only am I next, as being a no technical person, but who's next? Who's next out there who isn't hearing about this? And there's no great press. There's no great. There's no fury against it. Like we're losing legitimate jobs.
Well, smart people are concerned about it.
Yes,
but dumb people don't care. They don't think it's. I mean, this company and these people, but as knowledge of this ripples around, see, coders talk to each other. Oh, online forums, magazines. You don't know this world. It's like the whole business-to-business marketplace. Like as a consumer, you don't see it, but it dwarfs what you buy at the mall. It's what businesses buy from each other. You don't see what's behind the trucks that pull up. What happens, of course, is people are like, "Whoa, I'm not going into tech. Are you kidding me? We got to get you into STEM fields because there's a shortage." Right? No. People look at stuff like this. Oh, great. So I could get a job, and then 5 years later, I'm digging my own grave, and I got to join 5,000 other people trying to look for work at the same time. When everyone's outsourcing, it not only affects the now, it affects the next. It affects the tomorrow, the year after that. Because smart people are going to do anything other than get into tech, and that means that there are fewer local programmers, which means there's going to be more outsourcing. And we all know this. Look, come on, let's you and I be frank with each other. How many times do you call up tech support, hear a thick foreign accent, and go, "Yay"?
Yeah.
This is going to be nice and easy. Well, especially for me, because I know tech. So by the time I'm calling tech support, which fortunately I haven't had to do for a while, but by the time I'm calling tech support, I'm out of the 4-point script that everyone's handed. Like I've done all that. Mm-hmm. Have you rebooted? No. Yes, I have rebooted.
That's not Give me an engineer. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I need somebody who's got more than the flow chart. I need somebody who can think on their feet, who knows the tech, who understands the issues. So yeah, no, that's a challenge, and it may just be one of these things where it has to hurt to the point where people will change their minds. It's sad because it's all about incentives. Everybody is pursuing their own rational incentives in the moment. The Indian companies want the jobs. These people who run the companies want the reduced payroll. The shareholders want increased share value. Everybody's pursuing their own immediate self-interest, except, of course, for the coders. But the reality is, well, the other thing that's true as well, if unemployment insurance has a big problem here as well, or it is part of the problem, because without unemployment insurance, what would happen is people who got fired would take lesser wages just to keep eating, right? And so what would happen is, rather than staying on unemployment insurance, they'd go out and get jobs, and that would drive down the wages of coders. And what that would mean is it would become increasingly more efficient and effective to hire domestic coders rather than go to India. But because there's unemployment insurance, people then leave the workforce. They're not counted as unemployed after a while. And they're not in there bidding down the price of these jobs to the point where local coders can compete.
Yeah, that's a great point. And none of these companies, mine included, have ever come back and said that, going overseas, going offshore and hiring a consulting company and getting outsourced employees, we're going to save this amount. You could stay on and maybe get a reduction in pay, or leave, find your own wage somewhere else. They never come back and say, look, we're looking out for you. Maybe if you take a reduction, or hey, maybe I'm an executive and I take a reduction. That never happens. That's silly.
IT is a disaster as a whole. And I think a lot of it has to do with H-1B visas and this idea that coding is just kind of like typing. Why would we want to pay a typist 3 times? We get a typist for 1/3 the price. They type just as fast. It's an illusory efficiency. It's not like automation. And is it close to half of software projects completely fail? I mean, software is, by and large, disastrous. Can you imagine that for like cars or airlines? Well, 50-50, we're getting off the tarmac or not. I mean, it's terrible.
And that's it. You're working with people who want something that they don't really know what they want anyway. So it falls under the IT to understand what they're really asking for and program for that versus what they thought they wanted. Because a lot of times things that, end users think they want isn't possible, or they haven't thought it through at all. So the technical minds are normally a little higher level than the people asking for what they think they want. So there's a little discrepancy between the two.
Yeah, and if people want to just do a search for outsourcing disasters and whatever, and it's legion. It's legion. But the same people who've made the money are not usually the same people who end up having to pick up the pieces. And then, of course, what happens is there's a huge morale problem, because people don't want to go. Like, let's say that there's the outsourcing turns to be problematic in sort of 3, 5, or 6 years or whatever, right? So then what happened? This is part of this long-term thinking that is so avoided by so many people. So let's say there's this problem. Well, what sane human being wants to go in and try and manage that problem? Oh, we've got 28 different systems. They've stopped talking to each other. We've got outsourcing. It's on the other side of the planet. So you're going to be tired half the time with your conference calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, unless you want to fly out there, flip your entire schedule and get deli belly and spend 3 days throwing up in a hotel room. I mean, and so what sane human being is going to say, well, I'm a really creative, smart individual with lots of options and choices. You know what I'd love to do? I'd really love to go into a complete clusterfuck of compatibility and undocumented code issues and try and sort that out with people on the other side of the world, where there are cultural and language issues. I mean, no decent manager, no manager with choices and options. Can you imagine? Hey, Steve Jobs, do you feel like designing the next cool gadget? I mean, if you were still alive and all that. Or would you like to go and fix code compatibility issues and security holes and undocumented code from outsourced 3 million lines of spaghetti code from 2 years ago? No. Nobody wants to go back and work for that place because they just toasted all the last people, so they can't hire top talent without paying a hell of a lot of money, in which case people are there for the money rather than the passion of it. And they sure as hell can't get decent managers, because that is the very definition of something that no manager would ever want to do, again, unless you're just going to pay them so much that they'd be willing to bite that bitter bullet.
Yeah, and we were already there. I talked to some of my devs, and they said that some of the other guys who are having these knowledge transfers, it's almost been impossible. as far as the language barrier is concerned and the time barrier. I mean, we're looking at 10 or 11 hours difference to India. These guys are exhausted on the other end of the phone. They're falling asleep while they're having these meetings. And one of the guys said that I didn't know who was calling me. I couldn't understand him. I said, you're going to have to talk to my manager. He gets a call from his manager, and he's being threatened his severance because he's not being cooperative with his replacement. And I'm like, what kind of morale?
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to mention another thing before I forgot. And I mentioned this before on the show, so I'll keep it brief. The cultural issues are significant because the one thing I noticed when I was a manager was that different cultures have different levels of pushback. I really wanted the coders who would say to me, I think you're making a bad decision. I think you're taking things in the wrong direction. And here's why, right? And then we'd sort of sit down and go over it. And sometimes they were right. And sometimes they saved me a huge amount of time and work and hassle. Because I would say, I think we should do this. Now, there are other cultures that are much more deferential towards those in authority, right? And they'll say, okay, off I go, right? And they even when they know that it's not going to work, or even when they know there's going to be big problems, they're like, well, you're the boss. You program me, I program the computer. And if you move from a culture that is more skeptical towards authority, which you could say is sort of the American culture to some degree, and you move to a culture that's more deferential to authority, you don't get the pushback from the people who know the most about potentially bad managerial decisions. Let's switch all the servers to Linux, because whatever, right? Maybe that's a great idea, maybe it's not, but if you don't have people who are going to push back at you when you're making a questionable call, you're kind of flying blind in many ways. And that is not something that should be taken lightly. But again, it's the kind of thing that only shows up quite a ways down the road.
Yes, and the opposite's true. I mean, maybe someone from over there is going to push back, and you're like, well, what does he really know? Maybe you won't value his opinion as much because he's just over there, like what could he know? You're right. It's not a good situation.
Well, I know how to disagree with people from my background. It has nothing to do with race or anything, but I know how to productively disagree with people from my background. If you said to me, how do you productively disagree with someone from Japan? I'm not sure I would have quite as much fluency in that, right? Neither would the Japanese person. I mean, the disagreeing and having productive disagreements is very complicated. And a lot of it has to do with cultural history. A lot of it has to do with all the arguments you have with your friends and the things that went badly and the things that went well. You can't just snap that out and snap that in with somebody else who's got four fingers and a thumb on each hand. It's not the same. But again, it only shows up down the road. And it's like heroin. It's good now, but later you're going to pay a bit of a price.
Yeah.
All right, listen, I got to move on to the next caller, but
thank you.
I feel we solved the entire problem to the entire industry. So
yes, we're good now. Thank you.
We're set. Send your donations in. freedomainradio.com/donate. All right, thanks, Dan. I appreciate the call.
Thank you, Stefan. Appreciate it.